A rummage is an organised thing. It's planned. You know who is going to do what, where, with whom, and why. Everyone has their job, and it may have been weeks in the planning. Contrary to what most folks think, you're there to look not for things, drugs and so on, but space. Space where people could stow things. It's like playing an elaborate game of hide and seek. I loved to rummage. It was one of the best parts of the job, and ship rummage was the best of the best. Partly, I think, because I love ships and the water. I should say here that I can't swim, so there was always an added wee frisson every time we boarded at sea with no nets, the fun of me on the Jacob's ladder and the whoosh of the water below me. Ships are noisy beasts, the clattering, clanking sound of metal things doing their clattering and clanking. To be honest, I didn't feel it necessary to learn what they were doing in their clattering and clanking because that knowledge wasn't required for skulking in round about them, unless I needed to take things apart, and even then, you didn't really need to know what it was for in order to get it back together again, as long as you put all the bits back in the reverse order that you took them off, and from where you took them off, the job's a good un. But that's not really what this story is about. A vessel had come in, a big one. We had rummaged its sister ship the year before with a small team. And this one had been in all the right places for people to be putting really bad stuff in hidden spaces. It was all planned. Extra staff, stagging, an underwater camera, a drugs dog, the whole whack. She arrived and we boarded, and that's when it all started. The shouting, the yelling, the telephone calls to my boss's boss. I think you need to get down here. You see, generally when we turn up on any vessel, people did what they were told. We had a warrant that said they had to. This captain obviously hadn't got the memo. He was about my height. I'm a gloriously tall 5'1.5" inch, and he was jumping up and down like a wee zebedee. I know we use the phrase jumping his own height, but I'd never actually seen it until then. And he was objecting, oh my, was he objecting, to the removal of some previously identified containers. We'd sat for hours, my boss and I, identifying those containers, and this ship's captain did not want us to examine them. He was still shouting. At me, then at my boss, and then at my boss's boss. I'd never heard anyone shout like that at a senior officer, but to be honest, I'd never really come across anyone who tried very hard to obstruct us in our job, other than the fishing vessel incident, but that had been really quiet, even when it had totally kicked off. Most seafarers just accepted that this was the customs, and we were going to be looking, and that was it. And it wasn't just the captain, the chief engineer was twitchy and difficult. He may as well have pointed at the deck filled with containers and said, "What containers? I see no containers." Now, my grasp of Polish is scant at best, and I hadn't a clue what the ship's master was shouting, but it was fairly obvious he was not going to cooperate, and he was still bouncing up and down and yelling in Polish, about 2 inches from my boss's face. The chief engineer was not bouncing up and down, but he was definitely yelling about 2 inches from my face. Normally on a rummage would have been started by this point. A couple of bodies off to the engine room, usually me, because it's the warmest place on a ship and nobody wants the forepeak in the rain. Some off to do cabins. So the vessel would be sectioned up and everyone had their own area. I'd do radio check-in regularly, especially as the only female. Eagle Oscar, Eagle 1, come in. A hiss and a click. Eagle 1, this is Eagle Oscar, go ahead. Eagle Oscar, all good. A hiss and a click. It took hours of discussions, but common sense and the threat of holding the vessel at enormous expense to the ship's owners prevailed. And finally, in the very late afternoon, we were able to get a small crane in and get one of the multiple containers we had identified off the ship. Have you ever heard a crane? More creaking, clanking and clattering, with the occasional high-pitched squealing noise as great big iron shackles and bolts are utilised to secure the container, and it's then heaved high above your head and slowly swung over the water and down to the port side. The quayside was small. We could only get one container off the vessel, and the boss was pushing for us to get on with it and finish up. I've been in a fair few containers in my time. The worst was the tea boxes. Not crates, but boxes. Boxes are flimsy, and that's why I got sent in, smallest and lightest. I got stuck right at the back in high summer, and I could hear the sweat drip down off my forehead onto the boxes. Drip, drip, drip. Couldn't go forward or back. I was in there for 45 minutes, flat out on flimsy tea boxes, listening to the scratch and scuffle of the rats somewhere underneath me. Not really a fun afternoon, that one, and I was most grateful to be hauled out by the feet and damn the tea boxes. So this container we'd fought so hard to examine was full of bright blue plastic barrels. They rumbled as we rolled out too, and there was a pop as we prized off the lids. The manifest said they contained a liquid laxative. There was much joking and inappropriate bowel-related humour. We dipped them and found nothing. Imagine our disappointment. What had we missed? All the signs had been there. We were despondent. We'd had a hard week rummaging other vessels, but this had been the one we were sure of. No team found anything. Not an extra few bottles, no extra cigarettes, nothing. And that was really the clue that something was really wrong. You see, I've never rummaged a vessel and didn't find something. There was always something, even if it was just 40 fags. Not that you do someone for 40 fags. You're not there for 40 fags and 2 extra bottles of vodka. You're there to get the big stuff. So to not find anything, we were stood down and sent home. Grumpy, granach and gurney. We'd found the space, but lack of resources and especially time had got the better of us. But the story doesn't end there. My boss was a stellar bloke, and I got a call late that night. Are you still twitchy? Yeah, are you? Yeah, do you want to put some extra hours in? That's why the two of us were in the office on a Sunday morning poring over ship's manifests. The only signs were the ticking of the clock and the scratch of pens as we checked and rechecked, and that's when we found it. The number on the bond seal that we'd taken from our first container wasn't the same as the number on the ship's manifest. I checked the next one. It was different. I count phone rings. I didn't realise that until I sat on the phone that day waiting for the station officer to pick up. Finally, hi, can you come in? We found something. I listened to the clock tick as my boss presented our case. He listened to the clock tick while I presented our case. It had a hollow tick. You could almost hear the minute hand wobble when it bounced the next minute forward. And each minute was a delay. And then it got very, very busy. Tension and adrenaline-fueled calls to intelligence in London, persuading, presenting evidence, so many phone calls, ringing, phones ringing, handsets dropped and dumped, crackling into cradles, and then on to the next call, the kettle clicking off as yet another mug of tea was made. We jumped every time the phone rang, almost conditioned to dive for it across the desk. Will the Norwegians pull the vessel? Will they select our containers? Will they rummage? The vessel was rummaged in Stavanger, where they have massive cranes and a huge quayside, far beyond the capacity of a small port in the north of Scotland. And they were able to get all our identified containers off. They found 50 million Norwegian kroners worth of marijuana right where we had told them it was, in the blue barrels, about 3 rows back from where I had sat, despondent, on a blue barrel around 48 hours before. Imagine more disappointment. The target had been right, the right space identified, no drugs seized. Imagine our elation. We had been right. The international cooperation required to get those drugs off the street was lauded by the Norwegian press. My auntie phoned from her home in Norway to ask if her wee niece had been involved because she'd seen it on their telly. Her call, a mash of cultured Edinburgh vowel sounds and fast gabbled Norwegian. But you see, this is not just about the sounds of a rummage, all those metal noises that make you wince and suck your teeth. not the smash of waves on a metal hull and sploshing as the water turns back on itself. It's not just about the screeching whine of ill-oiled container doors as you open them, or the ringing of the telephone, or the shout of, "You'd better get down here." Not even the reassuringly solid thud made by the slam of the lamdy door as we would pile out to go and find the space, the hiding place, the prohibited and restricted stuff. It's also about what follows all that noise. You see, despite knowing that these drugs were and are coming through the north of Scotland, the government at the time closed that station that very same year. And now, well, now there's just silence.